Okay, now for section 1.5, we're talking about arrays. Now if we look at, on your right hand side of your screen, the person object, the container for person-shaped data that we created in step 1.4 is all well and good, but what happens if we want to store more than one person? If we wanted to store a whole lot of people, we come across this problem that you'll see here in the left. We go person p1 equals new person, and we do this for a whole bunch of people. This becomes 2, 3, 4 persons, 1, 2, 3, 4. This still isn't a huge advantage on the three different variables, person 1 underscore name, person 1 underscore age, and so on. So this is sort of a threefold improvement on what we had, but if we wanted to have a variable number of these based on something happening in our process, for example, we would have to hard code all of these in, and that's not really a very good solution. Excuse me. So typically what we do is we make a container to store data of a certain consistent shape. So you can't put 4 different things into an array. You can put 4 items of the same thing in an array. So that's one of the advantages or disadvantages of an array. The other is that it has to be defined at compile time as to the size of the array. So I could make an array of 10 people. I can put 9 people in a 10-person array, but the array doesn't get any smaller. And I also can't put 11 persons in a 10-person array, and I can't increase a 10-person array to an 11-person array. That doesn't happen. So one of the things that you often see is people creating an array that is 1,000 elements long, filling the first 10 and 20 or 30 or whatever. Not a really great solution, but it can work if you've got nothing else. Certainly a technique that's usable, but not a good technique. Despite the fact that arrays are not the perfect technique for every problem, we're going to have a quick look at how you make an array. So in the case of our person here, we're going to make a constructor, person. This person constructor is not going to really do anything. It's just one of those things that needs to be there. So we do that. So we also make a slight change to our properties here. So we add some information here in the form of a get and set. I don't even know what you call these things. Just a get and set methods that can be called on those properties. So this allows us to do a few little things later on, but that's not massively important. So okie dokie, let's have a good look at that. Okay, so we're going to come across 2 major problems here. The first is a peculiarity of .NET Core 2.1, and this is probably not something you're going to have to worry about, so ignore my iterating through and creating new persons inside my array, which I'll do in a moment. That's a peculiarity that you probably won't have to deal with. The second one is that when we're dealing with this try pass syntax, we can no longer pass in array elements like this. There are ways around it, but I think we might try 2 different methods to get past it. No, actually, we'll just bypass it altogether. We'll just simplify the project a little bit just to avoid that particular problem. This construct is a relatively simple one, doesn't work very well in complicated cases. It's just an example though. Alright, so the syntax for creating an array is data type, person, and we specify it's an array by the bracket syntax, and let's call it persons array. It is a new person array, and now we get to define how many elements it's got in it. So typically we'd like to have, say, 3 elements. Something that we should do, person count max person count is 3. Okay, let's replace this with a variable, just in case we want to change that later in a number of different places. We can change it one place and reuse that number. So we saw earlier while loops and for loops. Now this is the peculiarity I was talking about. Not use usually an issue. So you probably won't have to do this, but in my case, because of the version of .NET I'm using, I do, which is a bit unusual, but yeah. Okay, let's say for int I equals 0 to I is less than the max persons count, I incremented by 1, and in this case what we want to do is have a new person created to instantiate the object inside the array. So that particular thing, don't worry about exactly what that means or why for the time being. That's not critical, but it is required for something that I'm doing very specifically. Okay, so this time we no longer want to read into our overall person object. We now have a collection of persons. So the first pass through the program, this isn't in a loop, so it's reasonable to assume that we're going to write to the first person in this collection. So if you look on the right hand side, it would be the equivalent of person 0. So let's say let's take the persons array and say persons array element 0 dot name. I want to write my person name in there, and I want to check that its length and things is okay. Okay, so this is where this try pass business is going to cause us a little bit of trouble. So for the time being, what I'm going to do is just remove a bunch of stuff out of here. Not ideal, but it will do for the time being. So person valid. Okay, so now I'm going to do, we're going to take our persons array element that we want to deal with, and we're going to say dot bank balance is going to equal the the float pass, and we're going to take in this value as a string. Now if this were to fail, it would actually crash the program. That's why we had the other stuff there. For the time being, to illustrate a completely different point, we'll just ignore that. So what we're going to do is do the same thing again up here. So we're going to remove this try pass business, clipboard that, and we're also going to remove the else condition and move this back to about here, and say the age, the person age of string is going to be the thing we're going to pass to attempt to turn into an integer. So we're going to do int.pass, and we're going to store that into persons, what's the name of that variable? Persons array. Persons array element 0 dot age. Okay, so that solves our problem with that little error that is peculiar to passing in array contents. So now if we were to look at this, we can run the debugger, and when we run the debugger, so this is something we'll explore in a bit of detail later. All I've done is highlighted the line I wish to stop at and hit F5 for debug. Okay, I've got some errors. So there's 3 errors. My person does not exist. So what we want to do is change this output line to something a little more useful. So it's my person 0, persons array 0, persons array 0, persons array for the bank balance. So this will show us the name, the age, and the bank balance of the first person in our array, like in the right hand side on here, person 0. So if we want to see this in a little bit more detail, what we're going to do is stop the debugger here and actually inspect the persons array. So we hit F5, those errors should now disappear because I fixed them. If I save the file, hit F5, compile again, no errors, build succeeded, Now we stop with this yellow line at the line that I indicated I wanted to stop at. So if we now hover over I equals 0, because we've stopped on the first iteration through this for loop, the max person count is 3, and we're going to have a look at the persons array. So it contains 3 positions, persons 0, 1 and 2. Now, because we're in the first element, we're in the 0th position, I equals 0, and we've just put a new person into that 0 position, we have a code.person. Now the person's age, balance and name are obviously empty because we haven't done anything with them, we're just constructing the container. So if I hit F5 again, we will loop through, I will become 1 because we're at the end of the first loop starting the second, I equals 1. Now the one-most element in the array has got an empty person in it, and so on and so forth. So now we have 3. So that will now travel through the rest of the program, and we would be at the console ready to go. So let's run that in our console window. .NET run. Okay, person name, person 1, 11, 111.12. Okay, so that is the first element in the array. Now the obvious thing that we can do here is now turn this array into a collection that we fill up with inside a loop. So very much like we did with the earlier stuff, we want to do a couple of little things. So the first thing is we want to take out our is valid and take that outside the loop. So we're going to make that variable occur right up the top outside of where we're going to put our loop. And we're going to do the same 3 times. Pardon me. I'm going to remove that. And now, inside, so we're going to put, we're going to start the loop here. Start loop here, because we want to start at the entering a person level. We're going to finish what would be here. End loop here. So I want to print out the details of the person in question. So I find the easiest way to do this is going to be, we're going to want to reset these before we do anything else inside the loop. So first things first, we're going to set this equal to false. As are we going to do with that and this. I don't know if I clipboarded that. We're going to make these equal false, and we're going to save. Okay, so now we start the loop here. I would suggest, again, because it's my personal favourite, the for loop. And notice I'm going to open and close the brackets here and create this indentation. So now I'm going to grab everything that is supposed to be inside the loop down to my comment, cut it, paste it inside the for loop, and indent the first line to the correct depth. Now I'm going to grab everything inside the for loop and indent it one more time. This way we keep our indentation in place. Okay, so we want to loop a number of times. So it's going to be an integer number of loops, not a floating point or multiples of some weird number or anything else like that. So we'll say int, let us say persons entered equals 0. So while persons entered is less than max person count, we want to have persons entered increase by 1 at a time. Okay, so persons entered is now going to be the index into the array, so the position, the bookmark into the array. So this time we've got, array position 0, we're going to replace that with persons entered, which currently in the first iteration of the loop is going to be 0, but the next time it'll be 1 and 2 and so on. So let's go through and change the persons entered in each instance to reflect the current position in the loop. And then of course, because we're inside the loop, at the end of each pass around the loop, we're going to want to print this out to the console. Alright, so we've saved that. This should now allow us, on the right hand side, to do a loop 3 times. Okay, so person 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Excellent. So we've got the you entered details for the first person. Now we have person 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and so on and so forth. Person 3, 3. Excellent. So that does what we would expect it to do. Now the useful thing about having this container that we saw up here when we ran the debugger, and I'll run it again in the console, in the editor, we'll stop here and we'll look at this. Every time we iterate through, we get, a person. So the good thing about this is we have this declared inside our main program before the loop, which means after the loop is finished, it's still in scope, which means we can still use this person's array. So the most obvious thing that you'd want to do at this point is perform some kind of action with your persons. So let's say, that ends the loop of data entry. So this brings us back to, the last bracket right before we end. So this is effectively the very last line of code before the program ends. So what if we decided that we wanted to do something interesting like work out, let's say float sum of balances. It's new float, and we want to say for, so again, just out of habit, I create the loop before the brackets before I do the content. For int array position equals 0. Array position is less than the max person count. Array position plus plus. Now let's have a look and say, so the sum of all of balances is going to be the sum of balances, the sum of balances is equal to the sum of balances plus the current balance, which is going to be persons array, and in this case array position dot bank balance. So this will return the bank balance for the person at the current position and add it to the sum of balances. So at the end of this, we should have the ability to say console dot write line sum of balances equals 0, and say sum of balances. So this means right before the program ends, we are going to add up each one of the 3 balances that is in the bank account and then display them on the screen after we're done. So this shows that the container holding the person data stays accessible after we've finished filling it. So this becomes effectively a store of data that we can use for other things. So now if we run, we're going to have person 1 has got $100. Person 2 has $200, which is a sum of 300 so far. Person 3 has $300, which is now a sum of $600. Sum of balances, 600. Obviously you'd want to format this a bit differently. You might want to put something like that. You do a number format to put zeros on the end for number of cents and so on and so forth. So the important thing is that we've now established that you can have a container of containers. The array is the most primitive of containers.